Hello, and welcome to the Admittedly podcast. My name is Thomas Khalil. I'm the former director of MBA admissions and financial aid for my alma mater, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In this podcast, I don't promise easy answers or quick fixes, but I will use my decades of experience to help you achieve your education goals. Now let's get started. Welcome to the Admittedly podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Khalil, and today we're going to talk about the questions that we've been receiving on our social media. One of the best parts of this adventure, for me at least, has been the interaction I've been able to have with students from around the world on our social media, TikTok, Instagram. We get great questions. We get very thoughtful questions. We have students who are coming to us and really kind of trying to figure out where they are at different parts of the application process. So today we're going to talk about some recurring themes that we've seen, some specific questions that I've received, and hopefully we can all learn from this experience. So somebody mentioned the other day talking about essays that worked, because we are in peak essay season right now and people are starting to panic a little bit. And I know that a lot of you will go to Google and Google, essays that worked. And apparently Johns Hopkins posted some essays that they felt were good examples. And one of the things I don't like about this, of course, is that when a school posts successful essays, when you see people posting their essays, a couple things. Number one, the school is going to pick what I call the sparkly ones, the sparkly essays, right? The ones that you look at and you say, wow, that person is going to Johns Hopkins or that specific university. They must be very impressive. And the school is doing that obviously for a reason, to say, look at the great students that we're attracting. And there's nothing nefarious here. It's just, they're advertising how fortunate they are to attract these incredible students. But what we lose sight of is the fact that the vast majority of students do not have crazy stories to tell, right? They have intimate personal stories to tell. And that, for me, is the most interesting essay, right? The essay that is not about some earth-changing thing that the student has done, but rather a really self-aware and candid introspection and reflection on themselves, because that's where you get to know the student, right? That's where we dig in and we really get a sense of who they are and what they've accomplished. And what we see with these, sparkly essays, for example, is that students try to emulate them. But what happens is then they take small events in their life and try and inflate them. I'll give you a great example. We received an essay in our essay review service about this student who was on YouTube and building a website and doing these things. And as I'm reading it, right, all my red flag indicators are going off. And the reason for that is when somebody does something for real, there's an authenticity of voice. There is a voice of experience. It's informed. They're not trying to oversell you because they've done the hard work. So I made a list of the people that this student name checked and the websites that they name checked. And I went and I looked, and sure enough, couldn't find the YouTube channel. The website was literally a placeholder kind of website with some generic clip, graphics and photos. And so, my instincts there were 100% correct. And what I really object to is this trend of the passion project, because it really it's encouraging students to do these kind of half measures, right? Put up a website, start a charity, raise a couple $100s, and you miss depth. Right. And as an admissions officer, what I'm looking for, if I'm an admissions officer, is depth of involvement. I really want to see that you pursued something and were relentless at it and built a following or a credential or credibility or activity, over years, over time, that you really, really got in there and you know what you're talking about. And I know that it seems to you, and maybe it seems to your parents or your English teacher who's reading it, that you've done a good job at maybe kind of like, sliding the mirrors around a little bit. But when your comparative set is maybe, 10 or 20 or even 100 essays, it's nothing compared to the tens of thousands of essays that admissions officers are reading. And they very quickly can tell when things don't add up. And keep in mind too, they're not going to do the work to Google things. So, I, out of intellectual curiosity and just wanted to gut check myself, see if I was on target there, I went and did the work and Googled, and it turned out that I was right. So this essay, which we're going to give a lot of feedback on, but this essay in particular, looking at, you say, okay, there is something here that does not add up. And so how do we reframe that, right? So given that there hasn't been a lot done around that, a couple things. Number one, we would encourage a student to go in and kick that into high gear, right? Get some things going, reach out to other clubs, reach out to other students, get some involvement. There's not much we can do about the YouTube channel because that looks like it's been effectively shut down. But we can talk about the creative process. We can talk about how many viewers and views that they had, how they built that audience, why that was important to them, etc. Right? And again, I think the important thing here is not overstating. So yes, are there applicants that have YouTube channels that generate, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in revenue? Absolutely. Do they have, hundreds of thousands or millions of followers? Absolutely. And what I always try and tell applicants is don't compete with them. Right? This isn't a competition of who has the most views, who has the most follows, who's generated the most revenue. This is really about you and your actions, right? What have you done in your own context? Have you done it to the best of your ability, right? Because if somebody gets a viral video, yes, there's a lot of talent in there, but also there's a lot of luck. There's a lot of algorithm and things that you have no control over. And so we don't want to take away from those applicants who have been immensely successful at what they do, but we also want to be aware that that the normal student is making a difference in their own universe and in their own way. So, what else? What other questions have we gotten? Well, we've gotten a lot of questions about learning disabilities, right, and how I overcome a learning disability. And I think we have to be very careful with this because when we're talking about issues, and I know that I can sound cold and callous about this, and this is absolutely not my intention, right? So on the one hand, my heart goes out to these students who have dealt with learning disabilities, divorce, serious illness in the family, a death in the family, right? These are traumatic events, and we don't in any way want to downplay them, but we also want to realize that there are a lot of students who have experienced this trauma in their own way, right? Or this challenge in their own way. And so we need to really drill down and talk about how it affected us as an applicant, right? So yes, a learning disability is significant. But what we want to think about is, okay, is this something that, for example, found out I had a learning disability, maybe a little bit late, my grades were suffering, got diagnosed, got medication or therapy, got accommodations from the school. Look, my grades turned around, right? Now I'm doing really well. That to me is a story for the additional information essay. And when I say additional information essay, that should be a statement of facts, right? Not to take away anything from the struggle that you went through, from the difficulties, challenges you faced, but there are a large number of applicants, right, who have faced a learning disability and have dealt with that. And so it's very important not to, for lack of a better word, oversell that. You don't want to be in a position where you are, over dramatizing it and bringing too much into it. You can state that as a recitation of facts in the additional information essay. Now, if you have a learning disability and, for example, your school doesn't offer accommodations, and so you led a campaign to change that policy, right? If you involved other students, you gathered support, you worked with the administration, you put new protocols in place, and you changed the culture of the school, for example, then that might be a Common App essay. right? Because that shows initiative, tenacity, drive, change, leadership, teamwork, all of those things, right? And remembering again, it's not just about you. So did you involve other students? Do you have, for example, an advisory board or, vice presidents and things in this organization? Have you created mechanisms that you can hand this off when you leave, right? Or when you leave, does this all crumble into dust? These are very, very important things that we need to talk about in our essay because it distinguishes the quote unquote passion project. Oh, look, I built a website, I raised $500 or $1,000 or $2,000, depending on your socioeconomic demographic, for this cause. And I built a sustainable organization. I tied it into similar organizations across the state, country, world, regional high schools, whatever it is, right? That's a very, very different story. Same thing with, let's say, an illness or a death in the family. I see a lot of essays where it starts with this big dramatic arc about how they get the news, they can hear the clock ticking on the wall, they were devastated. And yes, absolutely true. I mean, to hear that a parent has a potentially fatal illness, to lose a loved one is gutting, right? We never wish that on anybody, and that is profound. And it is traumatic, and it, especially at this point in your life, can be very overwhelming. However, we want to just kind of address that factually, right? If you just state, my mother was diagnosed with cancer in the spring of my sophomore year, that's enough, right? We know what that entails. Okay, now talk about you. Now talk about how did you react, right? And don't just jump to the part where everything was, you were helping with the family and taking over responsibilities, right? You can talk about your journey there, confusion, how you dealt with that, how you managed that. Did you reach out to other people? Did you seek help? How did you process this, right? And then how did it change you, right? Not just doing more chores and taking on more responsibilities, but did you get involved with other groups? Did you in somehow change your extracurricular activities or your activities? Did you suddenly, because this was maybe a breadwinner in the house, did you have to shift and start working to help support the family, right? These are all things that distinguish a story that the admissions officer has heard hundreds of thousands of times to your story that the admissions officer has never heard before. And these are very, very important details. And obviously there's a very fine line between talking about your experience and trauma dumping. And I think it's very important to hold that line, right? We don't want to be trying to process and using this as therapy, right? We want to have progressed through that and gotten to a point where we can be self-reflective about things. Now, we also see a lot of questions around, growing through reading books or growing through watching a sibling. And, unfortunately, this is very difficult because these are very passive things, right? And so if you are, for example, a writer and you're a creative writing major, then maybe books and writing is definitely a vehicle through which you can express your growth. And I think that that's something where maybe we start reading and we start with the reading and how we're identifying with characters and authors and then progressing on to our own growth and development as an author and creator. That is a very different story, right? We really just want to be careful about being passive. We had a question about, can I talk about riding my electric skateboard and, how I think about things when I'm on that? And my answer to that is that's a great start, right? But then what do you do with those thoughts? If it's just about quiet contemplation, then that doesn't really inform us about you. It doesn't show how that contemplation drives change, right? But if you're talking about, when I need to think about an important issue, this is how I do it. And this is how I, process that and bring it forward and this meditative and this is how it, creates this pattern that I do to, work through things, then that's a very different essay. And it's much deeper about you. Another question we get is how to talk about why this school? And, in many cases, there are two types of essays, supplement questions around why school. Many schools will ask you, how do you plan to get involved in the community, or how does your community inform your activity and participation as a student? And that's talking about the extracurriculars. It's talking about your background. That might be any part of your identity that you feel is important, right? But we can't just state the identity, right? So if a student is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, for example, we don't just want to state that, right? We want to talk about how we've involved ourselves in that community currently and ways with which we want to become involved at the university, right? And we want to talk about other things, right? We want to tie it to current interests. At the same time, it's fine to say, oh, you guys are in the Pacific Northwest. You have a rock climbing club. I've never been able to go rock climbing. I grew up in New York City. Closest I ever got was, rock gym, but it's not the same. So I really want to learn about that, right? Why school for academics? Really understanding your path. How are you going to get the degrees that you're talking about? What are the particular professors, conferences, classes that interest you and engage you and make sense in your progression, right? It's fine to show, if you have in the room, some intellectual curiosity. So Cornell, for example, has a very long, like 650 word academic essay, right? How you're going to learn at Cornell. And so there you have a lot more latitude to talk about, yes, I want to be an architect, but I also want to take classes in business because I don't want to just be a conceptual architect. I really want to understand how to take my ideas and create them and build them, right? So we want to use a space available. A lot of these essays are maybe 250 words. And so you're really going to have to drill down and extract the essence of what you want to talk about. And really, abbreviation here is your friend. You don't need to use the professor's full name. You can use abbreviations. You can use course abbreviations. The readers are smart. Trust that they will understand what you are talking about in that essay. But again, you have to make it count. You have to make every word count. You can get right to the point and walk them through the arc of your academic experience and extracurricular experience at that particular school. A lot of questions we get are around cultural norms or religion. Is it okay to talk about this? And what I would say is that if it is a major part of your life and your experience, then certainly it's something we can bring in, right? So talking about faith, for example, is great if you are involved in your church or mosque or synagogue, right? Are you working with younger members? Are you doing outreach? Are you helping with the elderly, for example? Are you leading classes, fundraisers? But if it's just an aspect of your faith, that's fine, right? And that's a part of who you are. And certainly you can talk about that, but I wouldn't overly rely on it, because then you're just talking about something that is, I'll use the word passive here, right? Not that faith in and of itself is passive, but it's just a part of you that is for you. And unless we're relating that out to specific things that we've done, it loses its impact. Same thing with cultural norms. We have students coming from cultures where family time or involvement in family activities is very important, and that's great, and you can talk about that, right? But again, that can't be the only thing that we're doing, right? Because then it's something that we're hiding behind. And also we want to talk about how those values go out and they inform other areas of our life, and how we're bringing those family and cultural values to university. Okay. So if, let's say, your family every Sunday, it's very important. Everybody gets together. You have a large extended family. It's noisy. It's boisterous. It's loud. You're helping cooking. It's a big part of your culture. Great. Well, do you organize something similar for your friends? Do you bring your friends? Is there a club at the school that you're applying to? Can you start a club? Right? Well, like a club where people are gathering over food and sharing experiences and creating a larger extended family. So these are ways that you want to frame things that are more than just about you. We also get a lot of questions around ranking, class ranking and GPA. The Common App is very specific about what it wants you to do with that. It asks you not to calculate your own GPA. There are a lot of options there where you can state your scores. If you have a GPA, great. If you don't, great. The universities are very familiar with the different grading systems, and your school counselor, there's a section in their recommendation where they can talk about the grading system at the school. So don't try and calculate your own GPA. If you have a class ranking, great. If your class is not ranked, just check it's not ranked. That's very common with a lot of schools. It's absolutely not going to count against you. And so don't worry about that too much. So finally, I've used a lot of examples here. I've talked about a lot of things. I want to close on what I thought was a very good example from the comment section on our TikTok account. And the question was, can I talk about my father who used to take me with him to vote and talk to me about the importance of voting? And I wrote back and I said, it's an interesting start to a story, but where did it go from there? And this person said, oh, well, it interested me in politics. And so I got involved. I do voter drives. I created a politics club at my school to debate current issues and raise awareness, the importance of voting, inform my classmates about current events, current topics, current bills up for debate, how it would affect them. And so that, to me, that's a great story, right? Because it shows a progression. It shows the root of that, right? The father bringing this applicant along, teaching them the value, the importance of democracy, of voting, of having a voice, and then doing something with that, right? That's a big difference than just, oh, I used to go with my father to vote, and now I really, I think it's very important, right? So I hope we see the difference there and see how things, can develop, and how something small like that, and by small, I don't mean to diminish it in any way, right? Again, we're not talking about, this is not Greta Thunberg who is speaking to the UN, right? But this is a young person who is passionate about something, who is sharing that passion, who is getting involved, right? Who is driving change at their own individual level. And that is interesting. That's a compelling story to where you say, oh, this is somebody who's going to come to our school, to our university, and get involved and not be passive and stand up for what they believe in. So thank you for the questions. Please continue to comment, continue to ask questions. I love it. I love being able to tear down false ideas. There are so many false narratives out there. There's so much bad advice. I don't think, I think well-meaning bad advice, but please put those questions in the comments. Please, if you see something in the comments, jump in. We have great interaction in the comments with students talking to each other, and that's been fantastic. So good luck as we really turn the corner. We've got now about 6 weeks left to early decision, early action deadlines. I know that the heat is turning up, and I know also that you will do great. Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Admittedly podcast and download this episode. I welcome you to share your thoughts and questions with me. You can find us on social media at Admittedly Podcast. I look forward to continuing our journey together.